Captain Darius Vex had always prided himself on being a man of words, not war. A seasoned diplomat, he had negotiated peace in dozens of tense situations across the galaxy, but none had felt as daunting as this. Earth and the Drakari Dominion, a powerful alien empire known for their warrior culture, were on the brink of full-scale war. The Drakari had claimed several rich planets along the border that humanity considered vital for their expansion. Tensions had been rising for months, and Earth's leaders had decided to send someone who could speak their language. Someone who understood that diplomacy could sometimes be the only weapon capable of saving millions of lives. Darius was chosen for the mission, not just for his diplomatic skills, but because of his reputation for keeping his cool in even the most dangerous of situations. He boarded the sleek human cruiser, his thoughts weighed heavily by the enormous responsibility. His mission was clear: negotiate peace with the Drakari, or risk everything humanity had worked for. The journey was long, and as the ship entered Drakari space, Darius couldn't shake the nagging feeling that his life was about to change forever. Upon arriving at the Drakari capital, Salvora Prime, Darius was escorted to the palace, a grand structure that towered above the city, its spires reaching toward the stars. The Drakari were known for their immense size and strength, with scales that glinted like polished stone and eyes that burned with the intensity of a warrior's resolve. He had heard the stories of their ruthless combat techniques and their refusal to back down, no matter the odds, but he had also heard of their code of honor, their deep respect for those who could earn their trust, and he hoped that his words could be enough to appeal to that side of them. He was brought before High Empress Verika, a leader who embodied the Drakari's fierce yet regal nature. Darius knew she was no mere figurehead. Verika had earned her position through countless battles and had fought to keep her people united. She was a formidable force, and Darius couldn't afford to underestimate her. He could see the suspicion in her amber eyes as she studied him from across the grand hall, her sharp gaze cutting through the layers of politeness and diplomacy he had practiced for years. "You come with a message of peace," Verika's voice boomed, deep and commanding. "But your people are invaders, looking to take what is not theirs. Why should I believe your words?" Darius stood tall, keeping his nerves in check. He knew this moment was crucial. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance. "I understand your people's pride, Empress. I do not come as a conqueror. I come as a representative of Earth, seeking peace for the sake of both our worlds. We do not wish for war, and we believe that together we can find a way to coexist, to share the resources we both need." Verika's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was little warmth behind it. "Words are easy, human. Peace is not something that can be negotiated through simple speeches. Prove yourself worthy of my time, and perhaps we will listen." Darius felt the weight of her words. He had hoped for diplomacy to be enough, but it seemed the Drakari required more than just a promise. He braced himself for whatever challenge lay ahead. "What would you have me do, Empress?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Verika's smile grew wider, but there was a dangerous glint in her eyes. "In our culture, peace is sealed by proving strength. You will face a trial, Captain Vex. Only then will you have earned the right to speak of peace." Darius's heart raced, but he knew there was no backing out now. This was the Drakari way. If he wanted peace, he would have to prove humanity's worth, and it was clear that words alone wouldn't be enough. He steeled himself for the challenge ahead, ready to face whatever the Drakari had in store. He only hoped that his mind, not just his body, would be enough to survive what was coming next. The air inside the Drakari arena crackled with tension as Captain Darius Vex stepped onto the sand-covered ground. The arena was a vast coliseum, surrounded by thousands of watching Drakari, each of them a fierce warrior who had fought in battles across the galaxy. Darius could feel their eyes on him, sizing him up, waiting to see if the human would be more than just a weak diplomat. The cheers and jeers of the crowd echoed, but all he could focus on was the enormous figure standing opposite him. His challenger was General Skarkor, a hulking Drakari warrior whose presence alone seemed to shift the air in the arena. Skarkor was the embodiment of everything the Drakari valued: strength, brutality, and an unyielding sense of honor. He was known for his near-impossible victories in battle and his ruthless efficiency. Darius had heard the stories. Skarkor had never lost a fight, not once. Now he was here, to prove the worth of a human who dared to speak of peace. Darius swallowed his nerves, trying to steady his breathing. He had never been one for combat, preferring words over violence, but he had no choice now. This was the Drakari way, the only way to earn their respect. The fight had to be won, or he would have no chance at completing his mission. A loud horn blared, signaling the start of the trial, and the ground trembled as Skarkor advanced toward him. The general's massive claws dug into the sand as he moved, each step resonating with power. Darius stood still for a moment, assessing his opponent. The Drakari was a beast of pure muscle, towering over him by a good 2 feet, his scales shimmering like dark armor under the blazing sun. His eyes were cold and calculating, filled with contempt for the human standing before him. "You have no place in this arena, human," Skarkor rumbled, his voice like thunder. "But if you wish to die honorably, I will grant you that." Darius ignored the insult and tightened his grip on the hilt of his blade. He wasn't here to die. He was here to survive. His training as a diplomat had taught him to think quickly and act decisively. And now, those skills would be tested in a way he'd never imagined. As Skarkor lunged at him with blinding speed, Darius barely managed to dodge the strike. The general's claws raked through the air, missing Darius by mere inches, but the force of the swing sent a shockwave through the ground. The crowd roared in approval, but Darius's heart raced. This fight was not going to be easy. He danced back, keeping his distance, eyes scanning for an opening. Skarkor was relentless, using his immense strength to launch a flurry of attacks, each one designed to end the fight in a single blow. Darius's mind raced as he tried to calculate his next move. He couldn't match the Drakari's strength, and his speed was nowhere near the general's. The general swung again, this time in a wide arc, and Darius saw his chance. With a swift move, he ducked low and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. Skarkor stumbled slightly, his balance momentarily thrown off. It was a small window, but Darius seized it. He charged forward, using his agility to dodge another powerful swipe, and, in a flash, he landed a clean hit to Skarkor's side. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it made the general stagger. The crowd gasped in surprise, but Skarkor's expression remained unchanged. He was no fool. He knew the human wasn't just fighting out of desperation. There was strategy in his movements. The general's eyes narrowed, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Impressive," he muttered, clearly amused. "But it will take more than that to defeat me." The battle raged on, and Darius found himself growing more and more tired. His human body wasn't built for this kind of combat, but his mind was still sharp. He had learned to read people and predict their next move in his years as a negotiator, and he applied those same skills here. With every strike, every dodge, he grew more attuned to Skarkor's fighting style, slowly chipping away at the general's defenses. In a final, desperate move, Darius faked a stumble, causing Skarkor to charge in for the kill. At the last moment, Darius sidestepped, using his opponent's momentum against him. With a quick twist, he disarmed Skarkor, sending the general's weapon flying across the arena. The crowd fell silent, stunned at the unexpected turn of events. Skarkor stood frozen for a moment, glaring at the human who had managed to disarm him. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Darius's chest heaved with exhaustion, but he stood tall. The fight wasn't over yet, but he had proved one thing. Humans might not be the strongest, but they could be the smartest. And in that moment, Darius Vex knew he had earned a small piece of respect in the eyes of the Drakari. But he had no time to celebrate. The real battle, one for peace, was just beginning. After the trial, the air was thick with anticipation as Darius Vex stood in the center of the Drakari arena, his breath ragged but his head held high. He had won the fight against General Skarkor, a victory that few humans would have lived to claim, but now he faced an entirely new challenge. He had earned a modicum of respect from the Drakari warriors in the crowd, but it was clear that the real test was yet to come. As he made his way to the royal palace, escorted by the elite guards, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The palace loomed in front of him, its towering spires stretching into the sky. It was a majestic sight, built with grand marble and obsidian, but there was little time to appreciate its beauty. As Darius entered the throne room, the silence in the air felt suffocating. The Drakari nobles were gathered in the high balcony above, watching with cold eyes. At the far end of the hall, sitting on a throne of black stone, was Empress Virika, a ruler who had won her place through battles, cunning, and a fierce will. Her gaze was fixed on Darius, intense and unwavering, as if she could see through his very soul. "My victory does not mean I'm finished with my task, does it?" Darius asked, his voice steady, though his mind raced. His instincts told him there was more to this than just proving himself in combat. And sure enough, he was right. Verika's lips curved into a slight, calculating smile, and she rose from her throne, her presence commanding the entire room's attention. "You've proven yourself in battle, human," she said in a voice that resonated with authority. "But strength alone is not enough. The Drakari will only accept peace if I believe your people are worthy. And for that, you must prove your worth to me." Darius stiffened, feeling the weight of her words. He had been prepared for diplomacy, for negotiations, not for something like this. He'd been sent here to negotiate peace, to avoid a war, not to face whatever test the Empress had in mind. As if reading his thoughts, Verika's gaze softened, just slightly, but the glimmer of power in her eyes remained. "I will offer you a chance to secure peace in a way no other human has ever done before," she continued. "I will offer you my daughter, Princess Xyrika, in marriage." Darius blinked, momentarily stunned. The word hung in the air like a heavy weight, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. The Empress, seeing his confusion, gave a small nod, confirming what she had said. "You will marry my daughter, and in doing so, bind the Drakari and humanity together. It is the only way your people will be accepted as equals in our eyes. If you wish for peace, you must show us your commitment, your strength, your ability to join our bloodlines." Darius stood frozen, his mind racing. He had expected many things during this mission: diplomatic hurdles, tense discussions, even the possibility of assassination. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. Marrying an alien princess was not part of the plan. He had heard whispers of Drakari customs, of their powerful and sometimes harsh traditions, but to be thrust into such a proposal so suddenly was overwhelming. But as he stood there, looking at the Empress, he realized he had no choice. Refusing was not an option, not if he wanted to fulfill his mission and prevent war. Peace had to come first. It was the only way to save millions of lives. But this, marriage, to a Drakari princess, his thoughts spun, and he tried to steady himself, to find a way to make sense of the proposal. Before he could respond, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. It was Princess Xyrika, the Empress's daughter. She was tall and poised, her dark scales reflecting the light as she moved. Her eyes, sharp and cold, locked onto Darius with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Darius could tell she didn't want this any more than he did. "I do not need a human husband," she said, her voice clear and proud. "But my mother believes this is the way to secure peace. If you think you can win my respect, Captain Vex, then you will have to prove it. Not with words, but with your actions." Darius looked into her eyes, seeing the challenge there, but also something else, something more than just resistance. Perhaps it was respect, buried deep beneath the surface. But for now, There was no time to explore that. His mission had just become infinitely more complicated. "I'll do what it takes," Darius replied, his voice firm. "For peace, I'll do whatever is necessary." And so, despite the strange, uncomfortable situation, Darius found himself accepting a fate he hadn't expected. This was the Drakari way. He had no idea what the future would hold, but one thing was certain: this marriage would change everything. He could only hope that somehow, through this unexpected union, peace could be achieved. The days following Darius's unexpected proposal were a blur. The Drakari customs surrounding marriage were unlike anything he had ever experienced. The moment he had agreed to the Empress's demand, his life had been pulled into a whirlwind of strange ceremonies and ancient rituals, each more foreign than the last. But through it all, one thing was clear: his decision to marry Princess Tyrako was not just a personal choice. It was a political act, one that would bind the fates of both humanity and the Drakari dominion. Darius spent the following days in the grand halls of Salvora Prime's palace, studying Drakari traditions and attempting to understand the complexities of the culture he had only begun to scratch the surface of. While the Empress had made it clear that this union was essential for peace, she had also left him with little guidance. He was expected to know what to do, how to act, what to say, and how to behave as if the weight of this alliance was a natural burden he had been preparing for his whole life. The truth was, he wasn't ready. His mind, focused on diplomacy, was now caught in a whirlwind of customs, ceremonies, and expectations. He was summoned to the palace gardens one afternoon, where a large gathering was to take place. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, as the Drakari nobles, warriors, and dignitaries assembled for the official announcement of the marriage. Darius stood at the center of the garden, feeling more like a pawn than a player in this high-stakes game. Princess Xyrika stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd, her expression cold and unreadable. Her presence was regal, and the way she held herself made it clear she was a leader in her own right. But Darius noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the way her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't thrilled about this marriage any more than he was, and the air between them was thick with the unspoken truth that neither of them had chosen this path. The Empress appeared then, her commanding presence drawing the attention of everyone in the garden. She addressed the crowd in her deep, powerful voice, speaking of unity, of strength, and of the importance of this new bond between the Drakari and humanity. Darius felt the weight of her words, knowing that the success of this alliance was riding on his ability to not just survive, but to thrive in this new role. As the ceremony began, Darius was handed a ceremonial blade, its silver edge gleaming under the twin suns of Salvora Prime. The blade was symbolic, a representation of the trust and commitment he was about to take on. But as he grasped it, his fingers trembled. He wasn't ready for this, he thought. He had come here to avoid war, to keep Earth safe, not to become part of an ancient and powerful empire's royal bloodline. When it was time for the vows, Princess Xyrika stepped forward, her voice steady but cold as she spoke her part of the ancient oath. She pledged loyalty to their union, for the sake of peace, for the sake of her people. Her words were clear, but Darius couldn't shake the feeling that there was no warmth behind them. They were a matter of duty, not desire. He couldn't blame her. He had accepted the marriage for the same reason: duty, not love. When his turn came, Darius took a deep breath. He hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't known what to say. But standing there, surrounded by thousands of Drakari eyes, he realized something. This wasn't just about his mission anymore. This wasn't just about him and Xyrika. This was about the future of two civilizations, each with their own history, their own culture, their own survival at stake. "I vow to do everything in my power," Darius began, his voice steady, "to ensure the peace between our people. I vow to stand with you, Princess Xyrika, and with the Drakari, to forge a future where our worlds can live side by side, not as enemies, but as allies." Princess Xyrika's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a glimmer of something deeper. Perhaps it was doubt. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps, despite everything, there was a part of her that wondered if this unexpected marriage could be more than just a political maneuver. As the ceremony concluded, the crowd erupted into cheers, but Darius couldn't help feeling a gnawing sense of unease. The alliance was sealed, but the challenges had only just begun. Would the Dracari accept him as one of their own? Could he, in time, earn the respect of Tyraka? And most importantly, would this marriage really bring the peace that both sides so desperately needed? For now, Darius didn't have the answers. But as he looked at his new bride, this alien princess, who had become both his partner and his equal in a matter of hours, he knew one thing for certain. The road ahead would not be easy, but if peace was to be achieved, he would face it with determination, no matter the personal cost. The days following the marriage ceremony were filled with quiet tension. Darius had officially become part of the Dracari royal family, but his role was still unclear. Princess Xyrika had kept her distance, and while there were moments of civility between them, the coldness that lingered in her eyes made it evident that their bond was still one of obligation, not affection. The Dracari people were watching them closely, and Darius could feel their eyes on him wherever he went. He was the outsider now, a human in a world where strength, honor, and loyalty were valued above all else. As the days passed, Darius worked tirelessly to understand the intricacies of Dracari culture. His training in diplomacy had helped him in navigating conversations, but there was so much more he had to learn. The Dracari way of life was deeply rooted in tradition, and every action had a purpose. They respected strength, and not just physical strength, strength of will, of character, of conviction. Darius was beginning to understand that if he wanted to gain their respect, he would need to prove himself in more than just words. It was during a meeting with the Dracari Council that Darius's first real test came. The Council, a group of the most influential warriors and leaders in the Dracari Dominion, had called him to discuss the terms of peace. Empress Byraka was present, as were several high-ranking generals, including General Skarkor, who had grown even more imposing since Darius had fought him in the arena. The room was tense, and the air felt thick with suspicion. Darius was still an outsider, and the council was not sure what to make of him, or his marriage to their princess. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but the tension quickly escalated when one of the generals, General Tarvuk, spoke up. "This marriage is a disgrace," he said, his voice rough and full of disdain. "A human cannot be our equal, no matter what vows are exchanged. Our strength is what makes us who we are. What could a human offer us in return for our trust?" Darius took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. He had been prepared for this. He had known that there would be resistance from some factions of the Dracari, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. The general's words stung, but Darius refused to let them show. He knew he had to prove himself. He couldn't let the Dracari see him as weak. "General Tarvuk," Darius said calmly, his voice steady despite the growing anger in his chest, "I understand your concern. I am not Dracari. I am human, but I am also here for a reason. I am here to ensure peace, to ensure that neither of our worlds faces destruction. I may not have the strength of a Dracari warrior, but I have something just as important: the will to see this through." There was a murmur among the council members, but General Tarvuk wasn't satisfied. "Words, human, you speak of will, but it is strength that counts here. Show us your strength. Prove to us that you are worthy of the Dracari name." Darius's heart raced. He had expected a challenge, but this was different. This wasn't just about his ability to talk or fight. It was about his honor. He could feel Xyrika's eyes on him from across the room, watching silently. She hadn't spoken a word since the meeting began, and Darius wondered if she was waiting for him to fail, if she, too, had doubts about their union. Taking a deep breath, Darius made a decision. He wouldn't back down. He couldn't. If he was to prove himself, It had to be now. He looked directly at General Tarvuk, his gaze unwavering. "You want to see strength," Darius said, his voice low and steady. "Then I will show you what I can do. I challenge you, General Tarvuk, to a trial, a test of strength, just as the Drakari do. If I win, you will show the council that humanity deserves your respect." The room fell silent. It was rare for anyone to challenge a general, especially someone as feared as Tarvuk. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to speak. Even General Skarkor watched with interest. Tarvuk's expression twisted into a smile, one that was not kind. "You are brave, human, but I doubt your courage will save you." Darius's pulse quickened as the general stood, towering over him. The challenge was set. This wasn't just about words anymore. It was about proving himself worthy of the Drakari's respect. If he could win this trial, he would earn something more than just the title of husband to the princess. He would earn his place among the Drakari. The air in the room seemed to thicken with anticipation as the two men prepared for their test. Darius's mind raced, but there was no turning back. He had to show the Drakari that his strength lay not just in his body, but in his heart, in his resolve. This was the moment that could change everything. For him, for Kyrika, and for the future of both their worlds. The arena was unlike any place Darius had ever seen. The ground was a dark, polished stone, smooth and unyielding beneath his boots. Massive walls surrounded the space, covered with intricate carvings depicting the history of the Drakari people, battles won, empires built, and their warriors' greatest victories. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the air charged with the energy of the crowd that had gathered. Drakari warriors, nobles, and citizens filled the stands, their eyes fixed on the central platform where Darius and General Tarvuk stood facing one another. It was more than just a battle. It was a statement. Darius had no illusions. He was outmatched in physical strength. General Tarvuk was one of the most feared warriors in the Drakari Dominion. His reputation was built on countless victories in combat, and Darius was aware that he was stepping into a fight that most humans wouldn't survive. But Darius had something Tarvuk didn't, something deeper than strength, determination. His mission was clear. He had to prove that humanity had something to offer, that they were more than just a passing threat to the Drakari. The challenge was simple, a test of strength. No weapons, no magic. Just pure, raw power. The rules were clear, but what neither of them had anticipated was the mental toll this trial would take. As the crowd settled, the signal was given. Tarvuk lunged forward, his muscles rippling with every step. His movements were swift, calculated, and brutal. Darius barely had time to react before the general's fist was flying toward his chest. Darius twisted to the side just in time, feeling the rush of air as Tarvuk's punch missed by mere inches. The Drakari general's roar echoed through the arena as he quickly followed up with another strike. Darius blocked, the force of the blow sending a shockwave through his arms. Pain shot through his body, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. He couldn't afford to show weakness. For a moment, Darius felt the full weight of his decision. Why had he agreed to this? He was a diplomat, not a warrior. He had spent his life trying to avoid conflict, not to throw himself into it. But this was different. The future of both their people was on the line, and if he didn't win this fight, if he didn't prove himself, all the work he had done to bring peace would be for nothing. He dodged again as Tarvuk swung, this time narrowly avoiding the Drakari's massive fist. He could hear the cheers and jeers of the crowd as the general's movements became more vicious. Darius could see the determination in Tarvuk's eyes. This was a man who would never back down, no matter the cost. But that was where Darius had an advantage. He wasn't trying to win for glory. He was fighting for survival. Darius ducked under another blow and surged forward, using his momentum to grab hold of Tarvuk's arm. He twisted, using the general's own strength against him. For a moment, Darius felt like he might actually have the upper hand, but Tarvuk recovered quickly, his grip like iron. The two men were locked in a fierce struggle, neither willing to give an inch. But then something changed. Darius noticed the shift in the air, the subtle change in Tarvok's movements. The general was tiring. His attacks were slower, less precise. Darius saw his opportunity. With a sudden burst of energy, he delivered a swift kick to Tarvok's midsection, sending the general stumbling back. It wasn't enough to knock him down, but it bought Darius the precious seconds he needed to recover. The crowd fell silent. No one had expected this. They had expected Darius to crumble under the weight of the fight. But here he was, still standing, still fighting. And in that moment, Darius realized something that would change everything. Strength wasn't just about power or size. It was about heart. The heart to fight for something bigger than yourself, to push through the pain, to keep going when everything inside you screamed to stop. Darius didn't know if he could win this fight, but he wasn't going to stop trying. His body ached, his muscles screamed for rest, but he refused to back down. This wasn't just about proving his worth to Tarvok. It was about proving it to the Drakari, to Princess Tyraka, and most importantly, to himself. Tarvok charged again, his eyes burning with anger, but this time, Darius was ready. He met the general's charge head-on, his focus sharper than ever. The two men collided, and for a moment, it was as if the world had stopped. In that instant, Darius realized that it wasn't about winning the fight. It was about proving that humanity had the strength to face any challenge, no matter how impossible. And in that realization, he found the courage to push forward. The battle was far from over, but Darius had already won something far greater than any physical victory: the respect of those who had doubted him. And that was just the beginning. The trial had taken its toll on Darius. His body was bruised and battered, every muscle aching from the intense struggle with General Tarvok. But as he stood in the center of the arena, he felt something shift. It wasn't just his physical state that had changed. He felt different, stronger in ways he hadn't anticipated. The roar of the crowd had filled the air after the battle had ended, but it was the silence that followed that truly mattered. For the first time since arriving on Salvora Prime, Darius felt the weight of the Drakari's respect. He had earned it. The general had been a formidable opponent, but Darius had proven that strength wasn't just about brute force. It was about resilience, determination, and the will to never back down. And in that moment, it wasn't the cheering that mattered most. It was the quiet acknowledgement from Princess Tyraka that truly struck him. Her eyes, which had always seemed distant and cold, now held something else, a flicker of admiration. Darius had earned her respect, too. As he made his way off the arena floor, his steps slow but steady, he was met by Commander Jaker, a towering Drakari warrior who had been one of the few to watch the fight closely. Jaker's expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the nod of approval he gave Darius. "You've done well, human," Jaker rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. "Better than I thought." Darius simply nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mind was still racing from the fight, but he couldn't ignore the feeling of a new weight settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving the battle. It was about what came next. He had just shown the Drakari that humanity wasn't weak, but that didn't mean they were ready to fully accept him, let alone treat him as an equal. As he reached the steps leading up to the royal palace, Princess Tyraka approached him. She was alone, her usual entourage of guards nowhere in sight. The atmosphere between them was tense, but there was something different in her gaze. The princess had been silent throughout the trial, but now, as she stood in front of him, her posture was less rigid than usual. "You fought well," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. "I didn't expect it." Darius couldn't help but smile, despite the exhaustion that weighed him down. "I didn't expect to last that long either." Tyraka's lips twitched upward, though she quickly masked it with her usual serious demeanor. "The Drakari respect strength," she continued, "not just in battle, but in will. You've shown both today. Darius stood taller, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Then maybe I can show you that humanity has a lot to offer, he said, his voice more confident now. He didn't know if it was the fight or the conversation, but something inside him had changed. He wasn't just the human envoy anymore. He was someone who had the power to shape this alliance. Thyra K nodded, her eyes thoughtful. I hope so. But this is just the beginning, Darius. There are many who will never accept you, no matter what you do. It will take time. He nodded in understanding. He wasn't naive enough to think that one trial could change everything. There were still many who saw him as nothing more than an outsider, but what mattered now was that he had started to make an impact. His bond with Syraka, though still fragile, had begun to take root. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something else. Respect, perhaps. Trust, and that was enough for now. As they made their way into the palace, the weight of their shared responsibility settled on both of them. There were still challenges ahead: political intrigue, opposition from powerful factions, and the ever-present threat of war. But for the first time since his arrival on Salvora Prime, Darius felt a sense of purpose beyond the mission. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about the future. His future, and the future of both humanity and the Drakari. The road ahead was uncertain, and the obstacles were many. But Darius was no longer the uncertain diplomat he had once been. He was a man who had faced the Drakari at their strongest, and he had proven that he could stand beside them, not as an outsider, but as an ally. And in that moment, as he walked side by side with Princess Syraka, he knew that the future was theirs to shape. Together. The days following Darius's victory in the arena were filled with a strange sense of anticipation. It was as if something was hanging in the air, waiting to be revealed. The Drakari, while still cautious, had slowly started to accept him more, respecting him for his strength and determination. Even Princess Syraka had warmed slightly, acknowledging his courage and the role he played in securing their fragile peace. But the undercurrents of distrust were still there, beneath the surface. Others in the Drakari court were not so easily swayed. Darius had spent the past few days in meetings with the Drakari leaders, trying to find common ground between their people. Yet, as the days wore on, a nagging feeling began to grow in the back of his mind. Not everything was as it seemed. There were whispers in the shadows, the kind of rumors that made Darius's instincts flare. Something was wrong, and he knew that he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, manipulated. One evening, after a particularly draining council meeting, Darius found himself walking through the grand halls of the royal palace, the sound of his boots echoing off the marble floors. It was late, and most of the palace was quiet, the only light coming from the flickering torches along the walls. He had hoped for a few moments of peace, but as he rounded a corner, he saw General Skarkor standing at the end of the hallway, his imposing figure a shadow in the dim light. Darius, Skarkor said, his deep voice carrying a hint of something that made Darius pause. A word, if you don't mind. Darius stopped, wary. General Skarkor had never been openly hostile, but there was always a certain coldness about him. The general's respect for Darius was still untested in many ways, and Darius wasn't sure what to make of him. "What's on your mind?" Darius asked, his tone cautious but polite. Skarkor stepped closer, his eyes glinting with something that Darius couldn't quite place. "I've heard the rumors about the peace treaty," he said, his voice low. "You may think the Drakari are ready to embrace it, but there are those among us who still think that your kind is untrustworthy." Darius's pulse quickened. "I've heard those rumors too." Skarkor's gaze shifted to the side, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. "And there are others who believe that this alliance is a mistake, that your presence here is a threat." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Some of us are not so sure about the princess's decision. And if you're not careful, Darius, you might find yourself in the middle of a war that you didn't expect." The words hit Darius like a slap. He had known that there would be resistance to the peace, but to hear it spoken so plainly, by someone so close to the throne, made it feel all too real. Skarkor was warning him, but Darius wasn't sure whether it was out of genuine concern or a veiled threat. "What do you want from me?" Darius asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. Skarkor stepped closer still, his eyes cold. "I want you to understand that not all Drakari are so willing to welcome a human into our midst. Some believe you have an agenda. That your people will invade, conquer, or take something from us that we can't afford to lose." He leaned in, his breath brushing Darius's ear. "And if you push too hard, Darius, you might just find yourself a target." The general stepped back, his expression unreadable. Darius stood frozen for a moment, the weight of Skarkor's words pressing down on him. This wasn't just about proving strength or surviving challenges anymore. There were darker forces at work, forces that would stop at nothing to derail the fragile peace he had fought so hard to create. As Skarkor walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the palace, Darius was left with a sense of foreboding. The threats were no longer subtle. There were factions within the Drakari that saw him as a threat, and worse, they might try to use his presence as a reason to dismantle the peace he had so desperately worked for. But Darius wasn't someone who would run from a fight. He had proven his worth in the arena, and he wasn't about to let a few whispers from the shadows dictate his future. He had a responsibility now, not just to his people, but to Thyraca, to the future of their worlds. The stakes had just been raised, and Darius knew that he was walking on the thinnest of lines. One wrong move, and the war he had tried to avoid might be the very thing he was forced to face. The alliance was more fragile than ever, and now, more than ever, he had to choose his next steps carefully. Darius stood before the Grand Council Hall, the massive doors looming before him, each one adorned with intricate carvings of Drakari history. He had never felt more uncertain in his life. The palace that once seemed welcoming now felt cold, like a trap slowly closing in around him. He had worked so hard to get to this point, to establish peace between the humans and the Drakari, but with General Skarkor's warning still echoing in his ears, he knew that the peace was fragile, more fragile than he had ever realized. The weight of the responsibility hung heavily on his shoulders. It wasn't just about surviving the trials anymore. It wasn't even about proving that humanity deserved a place among the stars. Now, it was about preserving the future of both races, a future that was slipping away with each passing day. Darius took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had come this far, and he couldn't turn back now. He had to face this moment, whatever it held. Princess Thyraca was already waiting for him inside, her face unreadable as always. But this time there was something in her eyes, a flicker of concern that Darius had never seen before. When he entered the council hall, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him. The other Drakari leaders, their faces a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and even some quiet disdain, watched him with rapt attention. He could feel the weight of their judgment, but he held his ground, his eyes meeting Thyraca's with quiet resolve. "You've come," she said, her voice calm, but Darius could hear the hint of something else beneath her words. The burden she carried was just as heavy as his own. "I couldn't stay away," Darius replied, his voice firm. "There are things we need to discuss, things that can't wait any longer." Thyraca nodded, signaling for the meeting to begin. As the council members spoke, their voices rising and falling in the heated debate over the future of the alliance, Darius could feel the tension building. The room was a battleground of its own, each Drakari leader voicing their concerns, their fears about the human race, and what a peace agreement might mean for them. The whispers of war, the distrust, the fear, it was all coming to a head. Darius listened carefully, his mind racing. He had to find a way to unite them, to show them that this peace wasn't just something to be tolerated. It was something that could benefit both races. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't allow the fear of a few to ruin what he had worked so hard for. He had already fought one battle in the arena. Now he was ready to fight for the future. As the debate grew more heated, Darius stood, his voice cutting through the noise like a sharp blade. "I understand your fear," he said, his tone calm but unwavering. "I know that not all of you trust me. I know that many of you fear what humanity might do if we're allowed to join the stars. But let me ask you this. What do we gain by continuing to live in isolation? What do we gain by fighting against each other?" The room fell quiet. All eyes were on him. Thyraka's gaze was steady, but Darius could see the flicker of something in her expression, a sign of hope, perhaps, or maybe just the smallest glimmer of belief. "We've been fighting for too long," Darius continued, his voice gaining strength. "The universe is vast, and we can either continue to fight, to tear each other apart, or we can stand together. We can build something new, something greater than we could ever achieve alone." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We've seen what happens when we let fear control us. We've seen the wars, the destruction. But we don't have to be that way. I came here to bring peace, not just to the Drakari and the humans, but to all of us. And if you give me a chance, we can build an alliance that will stand the test of time." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of his words. Then, slowly, one by one, the council members began to speak, some reluctantly, others with conviction, but all acknowledging that perhaps Darius was right, longer enough to guide them. When the council finally adjourned, Darius felt a sense of quiet victory. The alliance wasn't secure yet, not by a long shot. As he left the council hall, Princess Xyrako walked beside him. Her face was thoughtful, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "You did it," she said quietly. "You've shown them that we have more to offer than just our strength. You've given them hope." Darius smiled, though the weight of their future still lingered. "It's not over yet," he said, "but it's a start." And as they walked out into the halls of the palace, Darius knew that the future of both humanity and the Drakari had just begun. There would be challenges ahead, but together they could face anything. Together they could shape a new destiny, one of peace, understanding, and unity. The dawn of a new alliance had just begun.